Hi guys. First, let me just write off the hashtag for you all. So, welcome all. It's really great to see you here. Really great to see a few of the same faces and a few new faces. So we are Startup Grind, and basically what we are is a community for startups. How many startups do we have in this room? I can see Business Mind, I can see Clad Light, I can see Akira Chit, I can see Hanga. Yeah, so all you guys, we are Startup Grind, we exist to build a community for you and of you. What we aim to achieve is to bring into this ecosystem all that you need, to bring in investors who are looking to invest in startups, to bring in talent, people who are looking to work with startups, to bring in industry leaders who are looking for innovation from startups. And the point is for Startup Grind to be that go-to place for you. And since this is a community for you, we're all about listening. We need you to come and tell us what you need and how we can meet your need. Yeah? So the team is Asha, Tony, and myself. We're passionate about entrepreneurs. We are entrepreneurs ourselves, and we're excited to have you here. Why are we hosting Erick Hersman? Well, have you met the guy? I think he's super cool. Yeah, everything he touches and seemingly turns into gold. Yeah, look at the iHub. It's grown into being one of the top 10 most innovative companies in the world. Look at Ushahidi. It grew from reporting tool here about the post-election violence crisis, and now it's used globally for marketing and so many other things. And then look at BRCK. It's one of the very successful hardware startups in Kenya that is also a global brand as well. So I'm really excited to introduce Erick and have him share his wealth of knowledge with us. Erick? So it's really great to have you. Have a seat. Yes. And then
studied in Kenya, right?
Normally people don't have to tell Jessica louder, so.
So you pretty much studied like at RBA, did a lot of rugby stuff, and then you went back to the US?
Yeah, so I grew up here. Then when I graduated, I went back to the US for university. And I was just like everybody, you go straight to university, and for me, it wasn't for me. I didn't want to be there at that time. And so I kind of looked for something else to do. And I think there's actually a time in a lot of people's lives where you actually want some kind of freedom to work somewhere, do something else. You don't want to feel like you have to be in school still. And that kind of gap year isn't available to a lot of people. And so for me, after the first year and a half, I dropped out of university and I went into the US Marines. So I was in the Marines for 4 years. And I did communications. And I got out of when I got out of the Marines, was straight back into school, did a business degree, and did my 4-year degree in about 2.5 years. I felt like I was behind. I needed to catch up. And so I did it really fast, and then I was back to my first business. I wasn't even walking for my diploma. I was on a plane back to Kenya with my first business, which was an utter failure, which was exporting high-end furniture and home accessories from East Africa. I would go source them, fill containers to the Eastern US wholesale furniture markets. It was a good idea, but you need to have a lot of money. And so this is where I actually learned, like, the intellectual stuff you learn in business school means nothing. You actually have to, sometimes you actually have to learn it, and by doing. And so for me, what I learned was cash flow is really important to understand. And I had some personal money, I borrowed money, you know how you normally start your first business, and when you have a container full of inventory tied up on a ship for 6 months, you have to pre-sell, you have to think about those kind of things, and even then it might not be enough. And that was the case for us. It ended up not working out. 2 years later, we finally kind of call it quits, have to pay back all my debts over the next couple of years. It was actually a really tough time. Like, that was my first major failure in life. I hadn't done anything like that just completely not made it. And so, you know, I had to kind of rebuild from the wreckage at that time.
Normally, a lot of entrepreneurs, they shy away when they fail. So, did you actually move from the exporting business, and what did you go into? Like, were you like roaring with fire to actually do your next venture, take all the lessons you learned and apply them?
Not at all. No, I mean, I was so pissed. And I was really, you know, like really upset that I failed. Like, I hate failure. I cannot stand that I failed, right? And I had to now figure out what I'm going to do, right? And that took 2 years of figuring it out. You know, finally, what I did is I realized that growing up with parents that were linguists, I actually had access to computers fairly early, even out here in Nairobi. So back in like the early 80s, I was on, you know, DOS machines and stuff, and just playing games like any kid normally does with computers at first. And so I already knew how to build a website. And I was like, hold on a second, why don't I do that instead? And so I found a company. I moved back to the States, so I was in Orlando at the time. Found a company and said, you know, let me just go work there. And I actually learned the business side of tech. I was put in charge of clients like Tyco and Maersk, so really, really large ones, and figuring out how to deal with their senior executives to sell things and then help our team deliver on them. And so it was a really interesting time, but I hate working for people. I'm not a good employee, right? I don't like, this is the same reason the Marines didn't work out for me, right? I can't stand when somebody's in charge that I don't understand why they make the decisions they make. And so it makes for me being a bad employee, right? And I try, and, you know, as I've gotten older, I've tried to be more, you know, considerate of other people's decisions. But I'm still, you know, I still do better when I'm not answering to somebody.
So, basically, that's Erick being the lion, right? Right?
Kind of. I mean, you know, so it took a while to get back to what I'm saying. So you think about it, if you do the math on the numbers, it actually took me to get back to my own company. It took me another 5 years, okay, of that in the wilderness time, right? Kind of running around doing things. You know, so and I think that's what a lot of people don't get. Sometimes you have to, you'll try something and good on you, you have the courage to try. But if you crash and burn, like I did, don't pretend like you're gonna have an easy way out of it, right? There's sometimes it's not easy. And so that's what happened. I basically had to kind of work my way out of that funk and get back into it. And you know, it was about 2006. So it was about 4 or 5 years until that really started to happen again. And it wasn't until 2008 when the Ushahidi stuff began and we kind of took off again. But that was, so yeah, there was a period of time that was really, it was a really rough time. And so yeah, you should have the courage to try things, but you should also figure out, everybody has to figure out how they're going to deal with the bad stuff. And actually, of all the things I can say, is when I hit kind of the bottom after everything crashed out of that first business, I was in debt to everybody I knew. It's like, does it get worse? Right? And I actually started, and this is actually what I do now, and what you should do too sometimes when things suck, right? Say, okay, if it gets worse than this, what does it look like? Actually think through that. Like, okay, well, what can I do to not make that happen, right? And then so what's helped me with over the years is when things get stressful and people start freaking out about things, I don't usually. I sit there and I'm like, hey, what's the worst that can happen now? Yeah, I can deal with that. I've dealt with this other stuff. I can deal with this. And so you work your way out of it, right? And it centers you. You're like, okay, I can deal with the worst thing that can be thrown at me, so let's just go. Let's roll with it and try and make it better than that. So learning how to deal with the worst case scenario really prepares you for the future, for when those worst case scenarios rear their head as possibilities again. And they do, all the time in life, right? Not just in business.
very good advice there is learning to actually see the risks and actually mitigating them. So 2006, I think around that time you were kind of a web strategist, and a lot of people knew you at Zungu.com, and you're pretty much known as Harsh in the tech world. Tell us a little more about you as a web strategist, you know, the Harsh behind the blogging and all.
She said hash, not harsh.
Okay, Hash.
You know.
Harsh. Erick, envision. You want to vote?
Yeah, so I started actually blogging in 2005 at a blog called White African. And it was just kind of a tongue-in-cheek kind of play at my US counterparts, who whenever they heard where I came from, they'd always say, oh, so you're like a white African, haha. You know, and I was like, so I saved the domain, and I had like, at that time I only had like 10 domains to my name, and I'd heard about this blogging thing back in 2005, and I was like, yeah, now I have hundreds, so so I was like, let me try this blogging thing, and I just picked a domain, so I had a couple, and I was like, let's do the white African one. And I had no idea what I was doing, so I'd start writing stuff, right? That's what you do. But I had no idea what I was gonna write about. And so eventually it took about 5-6 months before I realized that writing about tech in Africa was probably an angle I could play, and that people were interested in reading about. And so that's where I kind of started doing that. It wasn't until about 2 years later that I realized I had branded myself. Like, people knew me as white African, right? And I was like, oh, and actually I still get that today. I'll show up at a conference and people are like, hey, are you white African? I'm like, oh yeah, also known as Erick, nice to meet you. You know? And it's really awkward when I'm in South Africa, where there's a lot of white Africans. But it's, anyway, so I branded myself that way. And what I was doing at that time, I learned the kind of digital strategy stuff at the company I was working at in Orlando. And so I started branching out on my own under the Zungu banner, one of my other domains, and use that as the business to get on my own again. That was my first business to get on my own again with. And yeah, it took, it was 2 years of consulting and contracting work where you're dealing with all the ups and downs that come with consulting. Who here is a consultant? Who here deals with consultancy? Okay, so a good dozen or two. I mean, it's a roller coaster ride, right? You're always trying to get new clients and delivering and stuff like that. And I realized I really don't like that, right? And so what happened was, if I'm getting ahead of you, let me know.
Please go ahead.
Okay.
You're right on track.
Okay, so what happened was in 2007, the end of the year, you guys remember things started to get tense around here. 2008, things blow up, post-election violence. And so through some of the people I knew blogging, and through a conference called TED, Juliana sitting right there, my colleague and partner for many years now. 6.5 years we've been trying to do the online battles together. We got in touch with each other and said, surely there's something we can do around this craziness. Can we just track where things are going on, map them? And we built this thing called Ushahidi. We didn't expect it to go anywhere. But it did. And it did not because it was an interesting technology, but because it was an interesting way to use technology in an industry that wasn't used to having anybody use technology in an interesting way, right? So it's mostly top-down information from humanitarian organizations, governments, media, telling you what's going on in a disaster. For the first time, here in Kenya, there was people on the ground saying, actually, this is what's going on, and being able to communicate with each other. And that paradigm was a shift, right? So it took us a while to figure that out, and about 3 months later, we formed a company. But this is the interesting thing. It was like, at that time, I told you I don't like the consulting thing. So I remember sitting down with David Kobia, also one of the other co-founders, and saying, who also ran his own consulting shop, and I was like, David, here's the deal. You and I both run these shops. If we're gonna do this Ushahidi thing, we're gonna have to do it full time. And to be honest, I'd rather build this thing full time than deal with my clients anymore, right? It's like, this is a chance to do a product instead of services, right? And so we said, and the other thing was looking at it and saying, there's not many opportunities in life where you see it and say, there's something there that if we execute on it, it could be a big deal. We don't know what it is yet, but it seems like it's a special thing. And so, we kind of looked at that and we're like, Juliana quit her job, David and I, and Ori quit her job, and David and I shuttered our businesses. and started on this Ushahidi run. And luckily it's worked out. But we didn't have any money at the time. We didn't get money until 8 months after we started Ushahidi. So there was a lot of time where you're kind of, eating ramen noodles and potato chips.
So,
yeah.
would you say like Ushahidi was your first entry into the tech startup world? And pretty much like, this is startup grind. What's a startup to you? According to you, your own personal definition.
So, like I said, I've been blogging for a number of years even by then. And so it was, I was dealing a lot with, or talking a lot with startups, but this is the first one that I had done that had a product, right? Because you can have a startup that's a consulting firm, completely different than a startup that's a product firm, right? And yeah, so a startup, can take many forms. And for me, I think the most interesting ones are things where you build stuff. It took me a number of years to realize that I'm a builder. I like to build stuff. So whether it's Ushahidi, iHub, BRCK, it's like get these things going, figure out the problems early on, build a team. Those are the kind of things that I like to do. And there's nothing quite like when you have a product that you're putting together and then you see it come about, right? Who here has built a product? It could be, you built something with your hands, you built a company, you built, how many here have actually built something? So good, at least half of you, right? And there's this feeling of like you just feel really good about yourself. There's this feeling of like, okay, I did it. I actually did something, right? That I can see. Most people are doing, if you're doing consulting stuff, you're like doing work for other people, you're getting something done, you're pushing papers in a cubicle. You don't see the final product, right? And so when you actually build something, it is really gratifying.
So really what motivates you is the ability to actually build product and actually see tangible aspects of what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And I also like to win. Okay, that's the other thing. Like, I'm competitive. And so when you're starting something new, you got to figure out what windmill you're tilting at and what you're gonna do about that, how you're gonna beat the odds. Because you're trying, as a startup, you're rolling the dice, and you've got to beat the odds. With BRCK right now, I mean, our competition is either vast or huge every time. So it's the Cisco's or the HTCs or whoever of the world that we have to eventually compete with. That's a huge problem, right? That's a huge opportunity, and that's a huge risk. And so there's all this craziness that goes on when you're doing that kind of stuff. But that's something to tilt at. Now, you want to live your life so that you have something that's worth going for, right? And I don't think enough people are willing. I think a lot of people lack the courage to try for those big things. And I'm not. There's no even judgment on that, right? Because different people need to do different things. Not everybody can be a startup person. Not everybody can be an entrepreneur, and nor should they, right? But for somebody like me, that's what I need. I need to be able to go after something and with a desire to win and build something and succeed.
So you actually have a number of ventures that you are part of the founding team, that you sit as part of the board. And let's rewind back a little bit with Ushahidi and then the iHub. What did you look for in terms of like what startups normally look for is like team and market. How did you actually, let's start with team. How did you actually build a team? What did you look for in the team? How did you give and ask the team that you actually built to buy into your vision?
So I think there's different circumstances that build every startup. For us, we were kind of, for Ushahidi, we were just kind of shoved together because we self-volunteered to build this thing, and then it became a business 4 months later, right? So that's an anomaly. Like that doesn't normally happen. So we were forced to learn how to work with each other because we had to. There's nobody else, and there was nobody else on that team for a good year. And we finally hired our first employee, and iHub is very different too. It was very much a community-led effort. There's people in this room who were at the first conversation that would be the seed for for the iHub back in 2008 at BRCK Nairobi. And by the way, BRCK Nairobi is this Saturday at the iHub. If you're not going, you should go, because that's where the relationships and conversations really happen. But you know, and so we kind of formed this group and kind of community-led ideas around this is what we should build. Guys volunteered their time. 2 companies that are not normal, right? And so organizations that grew out of abnormal circumstances. Whereas BRCK is a little different now. BRCK is a for-profit company built with a team that's focused on this thing, but it was spun out of Ushahidi. I'm not answering your question about how do you find interesting people that you work well with, because I'm saying that a lot of my experience is that the people that are around me in my kind of satellite orbit are people that I end up working with a lot because I know and trust them. Those are the people that make the most sense to work with. What happens what I think really gets interesting is when you talk about the next layer, okay? Beyond the founding teams. How do you find those people? How do you get them interested in what you do? You know, there's 2. I was told this. Like I had a mentor in that company, that tech company in Orlando, where he was a senior vice president of sales, and he rang me like, okay, call up this client and get this meeting organized. And I remember sitting in a hotel room one day, him across, sitting on the other bed from me, saying, I pick up the phone and I call and I go, you know, hey Jessica, and I put the phone down. He looked at me, he was like, what did you just do? Call her back. But it was, you know, and I called her back and I said, hey Jessica, this is Eric, and, and he would look at my emails and go word by word. He would look at, we'd do PowerPoints before we went down to the client. The day before, we'd be at the office at 7 a.m., spending 3 hours on the PowerPoint presentation, going through every single word, every single image, the placement, the timing, everything about it. And I learned a great deal from this guy, right? Paul Lewis was his name. And you know, it was through experiences like that I can't remember how I got on this thread, something about mentorship. But it was through that I learned a lot about detail, and it was through that I learned also about how to work with other people and expect a lot out of other people. And I think this is actually something that a lot of people don't do, which is they don't think about how much other people are actually capable of. And there's a lot of trust that isn't evident from the beginning. When you hire somebody or when you form a team with somebody, if you don't show, not just in what you say, but in your actions, that you truly trust that person to be able to get what they need to get done, then don't expect them to get it done, right? They will fulfill the expectations that you set for them. So for many years, our team at Ushahidi, there's like, and still, there's very little management, right? Nobody wants to micromanage. I hate micromanaging anyway, so I just say, even any of the companies, like, hey, this is what needs to be done, go do it. And you know this, Jessica, because you were given this many times, like, hey, Jessica, this is what needs to happen. And the route to that is up to you. Just get it done. You don't care how many hours you work a day, you don't care, you know, anything else about your personal life beyond that. It's like, this is the thing you need to get it done, and get it done better than we expect. That's actually what our expectation is, or at least my expectation is. And so I don't think, I mean, trust is an interesting thing. So I remember my mom when I was in high school, or middle school, there was, we had a house help, and we lived in Upper Hill at the time, and she was, she left, right? So we had to hire a new one. And there was so what my mom would do is, whenever somebody new came in, she would make an excuse to leave in the middle of the afternoon and not come back until after that person left for the day, the first day on the job, okay? And there's a lady she hired, she was gonna be the house help, and she stole some earrings or a necklace or something. She just fired her. She didn't ask for the thing back, she just fired her. The next lady came in a couple of days later, and she didn't fire her, because she didn't steal anything. And it was years later that this lady, who really was like a second mother to me, right, a Ugandan lady, she said, the fact that your mom trusted me was so much when I hadn't proven anything yet. She just trusted me. made a huge impact on what I was willing to do and what I could do here. And so I think about that a lot with what I do with people who end up working for me. It's like, I trust you a great deal, and I'm going to give you all this. I'm going to expect the best out of you. I'm going to expect that every decision you make is for the benefit of not yourself, but for the organization. And you're going to, and that even if you make a bad decision, it came from the right place, right? We start with that expectation, and you prove me wrong. And because of that, I think it's that kind of mentality that helps you bring in really great people who want that freedom to get stuff done, don't want to feel like they work in a company that everybody's breathing down their neck and micromanaging them. I've been talking for a long time, so bad.
Excellent. So, as part of your many ventures, you built a great team. Let's talk about the activities among these different ventures. How did you actually go about fundraising for both Ushahidi and the iHub, specifically because a tech hub at that particular point in time did not exist? Like, what are the challenges and what are the strategies you just went out there and said, you know what, I'm doing this, man?
How do you get money? You've got to, I think getting money is a lot about people. It's actually not about money. Certain people have a job that they have to give money away, right? Either as investors or as grant-giving institutions or whatever it is. That's their job. And they want to they have to give it away. They want to give it away. They want to give it away to good people. And so your job is to make them make their job easy to do that, and to make them look good once they do, right? So that you don't have to go raise more money every time. You just next time you go back to the same guys and say, okay, let's re-up. And you also have to be really convincing. I think this is what I forgot about Paul Lewis. I knew there was a thread here. All right, I'm gonna bring it back. So Paul, years after I left that company, we still stay in touch. Every time I'm back in Orlando, we meet up for coffee, right? And there was a time, yet a number of years ago where I was going through this really big funk with stuff, and I was like, he's like, it was a personality thing, right? And I said, here's what's going on. He's like, well, here's what you have to understand there. There's two types of leaders. There's leaders who lead by rules, and there's leaders who lead by inspiration. They don't mix well together, right? And so people who lead by rules, and they work really well for certain types of companies. If you're starting a bank, you better lead by rules, right? There's not too much inspiring about leading a bank, okay? However, if you're doing something like what I do, you better lead with inspiration. People better believe in what you're trying to do. The same goes with funders, right? It's a lot easier to raise money when people also buy into that vision of what you're trying to do. So, did the money come quickly for iHub? No. I spent 2 years talking to people. Hey, Google, Nokia, you guys want to do this thing where we're gonna put a bunch of tech guys in a room in Kenya and good things are gonna happen? Like, what are you drinking? Right? Like, seriously, people were like, why would that be a good idea? Tell me, where did you come from, right? Like, there was some real, questionable looks. And so it was actually the Ushahidi team back in beginning of 2009, we finally, after 2 years of looking for money, I was like, guys, I don't know if we can find this money. And we, as a team, sat around the table and we're like, we can get money. Why don't we just throw the money in? What we'll do is we'll use our Ushahidi brand that we were pretty good at raising money with, and use that to kind of direct the money into beginning the iHub. So our first funder and they know the story now, so I can be public. So it was a Midyar network on the iHub, right? And they were our first big funder into Ushahidi, something like $1.4 million over 3 years. So it was a pretty big chunk of change. And but 200,000 of that was for the Ushahidi office in Nairobi. It wasn't an office for us. We built the iHub, right? And our main guy at Midyar knew that we were going to do that. He said, "Don't tell the board. They will think this is nuts. Do not." But we built. So he said, "But go ahead. You've got my blessing to do it." Right? So it wasn't completely, rebellious. And so we built the iHub, and a Midyar comes by and says, "Oh my gosh, this place is amazing." So a Midyar network now is one of the leading funders for all the tech hubs in Africa. right? But they never would have funded it if they hadn't seen it. So there's sometimes that you get money for things that in indirect routes, right? And you've just got to be open to being creative around that too. Yeah. So there's more about money, but I don't know if that's enough or not.
Well, I'm actually curious, at what point in your life did you actually like do heavy fundraising, or like what are the tips and tricks you actually learned? Like how did you actually, you're an expert fundraiser, Erick. You raised $1.5 million US for BRCK this year. So, all right. 1.2, really? Okay, 1.2 million. And like, how does one get to that stage? Like, where do you start? Like, there are a lot of entrepreneurs and startups in this room that are actually looking for mentors, they're looking for investments, skills in terms of business tech, but how do you fundraise?
Well, the first thing for me was when I realized that your job is to always be selling, right? You're always selling something, even if you're just talking to somebody, you're convincing them of going to, you know, the music festival this weekend. That's selling, right? You're selling people all the time, and once I realized that, I realized it's not actually selling either. It's just you're talking with people, and you're figuring out, you know, what's a good thing for them and you, and when you break it down to something that's simple, then you lose all the baggage of all of sales and business development and marketing and all that crap, right? And you realize it's just people and trying to figure out what's good for each other and making that work together. So I didn't start fundraising, I didn't start doing anything until Ushahidi began. And the first fundraiser that we did, like I said, it took 8 months. It was Humanity United for Ushahidi. And I was on the phone with this guy, and we got in this big argument. Because he didn't think that technology for kind of humanitarian crisis could also work for earthquakes and disasters and stuff like that, you know, like political crisis. And I was like, well, what do you think the Red Cross does? Aren't they just like an analog version of this? Aren't we just a digital version of what the Red Cross should be doing anyway? And we had this huge argument. Like my first funder, first call, huge argument, right? And we ended up coming back to the table, we kept talking, and eventually they said, okay, we're in, we're going to give you $200,000. It's enough to pay the 4 of you to go work for 2 years, or work for a year. And that was my first time I'd ever raised money. That was it, all right? And I had I came from the for-profit business world. I didn't know anything about grant raising. I didn't know anything about that world at all. It was eye-opening. Like what goes on in the grant world is ridiculous, right? And it took me a while to realize that it's actually about egos. You know, organizational egos. What they want to fund is things that they can, you know, wave a flag about, right? And once I started seeing that, I was like, oh, well that's, okay, we can play that game, you know? And we're pretty good at waving a flag, right? And so Ushahidi and iHub and even BRCK, you know, we hit well above our weight class with media. That's part of the strategy. That's what works because the funders like that too. It turns out it's also good for-profit businesses, right? But here's the other thing, it's work. This is what the other guys don't get, right? It's like, you have to work. There's a 6-month funnel to get in money. And that's from $200,000 and above. You better be willing to commit 6 months before you ever see a single dime in the bank. And most people don't have that level of commitment. When I went to raise the money for BRCK, it started in November of last year. The worst time to raise money. Do not try and raise money over the holidays from November, December, January until February. It's terrible. It's like nobody wants to talk to you. So I know quite a few people, as you can imagine, with my job and everything. And I was talking to people in San Francisco, New York, Kenya, Austin, Boston, all these places. I was traveling to them. I was knocking on doors for 3 months. 3 months before a single dollar dropped in the BRCK bank account. Okay? And then, once you get that first dollar, it's like, okay. Because no, it changes, is even when you're decent at money raising, right? There's, people can sniff and smell when you don't have it, right? It's like when you don't have a job and you're looking for a job, people can tell that you don't have it, right? And so, but when you get that first dollar, all of a sudden you're confident. You're like, yeah. So, this is why you need to give me the money. And they're like pushing back and you feel like you're confident enough to push back on them too, right? And that's the kind of thing that actually helps you get it. Like it takes a little bit of that because I deserve it. That's why you need to give it to me, right? And because we are the best. And once you get it, you can actually, so we then were able to steamroll that. Like we actually asked for 600,000. As soon as we got our first commitment of around 400,000, then I went up to everybody and said, all right, we're raising 1.2 now. Who's in? And then boom, boom, boom. Like they came out a lot faster. And it took 4 to 5 months. It took 3 months of nothing. And so this is recent history, guys. This is this Christmas that this is happening, okay? This isn't something that happened, 10 years ago. This Christmas, 6 months ago, or 8 months ago. I remember sitting at Christmas, between like Christmas and New Year's, and I was so angry. I can't stand it when people tell me no. I can't stand it. Like, what is wrong with this person? Like, how can they not see when it's so obvious? Like, and so, I mean, like, and you're sitting there having these conversations with people, and you're like, okay, I'm going to try not to judge you for your intellect because you said no to me, right? Like, surely there's something, else, and maybe I'm missing it, and but there's this, like, but there's also this feeling of inevitability. Like, I know it's going to happen eventually, right? And you got to have that belief when you're raising that money. It's hard. Talk about startup grind, right? There's a couple of grinds that happen with a startup. One of those grinds is getting money. It's hard for everybody. So you think your life is hard, try raise money. It gets harder, okay? Because you have to look like you can do it, even you gotta fake the funk for a while until you actually get it, right? There's another grind that happens too, and that's when you actually get the money and you have to deliver and you have to start making money. Kamal sitting over here with Mobas is a great example. Going through that grind for a year and a half, 2 years now? Yeah, 2 years. I mean, that's a grind, and and here's the other thing people forget. Like, and Juliana can tell you, we were grinding away at Ushahidi for 2 years before the Haiti earthquake hit, and then everybody said, oh, these Ushahidi guys just came and built this. No, we've been building it for 2 freaking years, right? And they think you just, all of a sudden you're there. And that's how startups work. And that's not how startups work. You work in the dark without anybody really paying attention or caring. And eventually, if you stick with it long enough, and you have a good idea, and you have a good team, and you have a good business model, things can work. And that's the other grind.
Excellent. Erick, man, you're a trailblazer, right? Trailblazer right there. Look at that. 2008, Ushahidi. 2 years later, iHub. 2 years later, come on, ladies and gentlemen, people, BRCK, Savannah Fund. Hey, Erick. I mean, like, seriously, man, that's like, in less than 7 years, you kind of like start all these things and things just happen. And just give us the salient ingredients, like, for a young entrepreneur or somebody who's to be an aspiring entrepreneur. What do they need to look for? What do they need to look for?
I think that's a little bit, yeah, you're right. I mean, once you've had a success at something, it's easier to do the next thing. People believe in you more. You have more access to people and money and things like that. That's very true. There's also, I have a lot more ideas than I think a lot of people do. And I say no to many of them, right? Or I just like, okay, that. But I also ask a very simple question about any kind of feature, idea, maybe possible business thing. I think a lot of people don't. A lot of people say why, how. I actually say why not? Why couldn't we do that, right? And I think it takes, you have to suspend belief sometimes when you do that. You have to say, okay, there might be this future possibility if we do everything right? And the big trick is actually getting other people to believe in that future eventuality becoming real. And if enough people do, then it does. And that process is very complicated. And it takes a lot of working with people. Again, it's people time and people relationships that matter to make that happen. But the asking of the why not and the trying to solve a problem that actually matters to you is one that I think a lot of people are building businesses that are searching for a problem, right? You've heard that before, and it's very true. Every single thing that I've done is a problem that has hit me directly, and I'm like, okay, well, let's solve this. And a lot of people say, well, okay, but that's not possible, or it's hard, or yeah, of course it's hard. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it, right? So like you look for hard things, and you try and solve for those hard things. And even when people say it's not possible, you still go for it. And I think that's a mentality that, again, not everybody needs to have or should have, but the entrepreneurs, amongst us, have to have.
And just a side note, like BRCK raised money over Kickstarter. I mean, that was out of the box thinking. Like, tell us a little more about that.
So who here knows what BRCK is? Before I keep talking about it. Okay, so BRCK is a hardware product. It's a Wi-Fi router. It's a modem, all self-powered. And there you go. Juliana's holding one up. That's the BRCK. It's inside of a Sandstorm case, so it actually looks a lot uglier than that.
I have a keychain.
It was actually incubated within Ushahidi. So Ushahidi, we probably spent $100,000 in 1.5 years to get it to the place where people saw it on Kickstarter. And then we raised another $150,000 on Kickstarter. And the idea for Kickstarter wasn't so much the money. Yeah, the money was nice, and the idea, but the big thing for us with Kickstarter was we've got this idea, we've got this product that we built, and it works. We've actually built a prototype 1.5 years later that works. Does anybody else think it's interesting? So for us, it was a lot of market research. Who else out there would be interested in this thing? And so what it proved out to us over that course of that month that we ran it was we set the goal for $125,000. We raised 1.7 after they take away all the money for Amazon and Kickstarter. We were left with 150, and then we dashed people's hopes and dreams by missing all our dates and timelines and everything. We thought we could ship by November. That was like all of us smoking something. It didn't work. We had all kinds of problems, and we eventually got it. We actually shipped finally a month and a half ago. But, we shipped our first brick 6 weeks ago, so we were like supremely excited, and we still have problems, right? There's, like you do with any new product, you're always going through this process of learning from the customer, iteration on it. And but the Kickstarter was hugely valuable because it built us also a secondary thing. It built us a tribe of people who are our fans, and they really wanted us to succeed, and they pushed us to get it done, to not just expect, oh, we have this deadline that we missed. No, they want this thing, right? And they want us to succeed at the same time. So building that kind of tribe of our own was a hugely valuable thing from Kickstarter as well. So I think crowdfunding, there's the obvious one that everybody goes for, which is I can get money that way. Okay, sure. But I think you should look at the secondary and tertiary reasons as well. If you can build out a better understanding of your market because of it, and you can build out a core group that really love you and want to see you succeed, then those things are hard to put a monetary value on.
Alright, I can see your beautiful daughter Lauren in the crowd. How do you make time for family? You seem like a pretty busy man, right? How do you make time for your beautiful family? And tell us a little more about your family.
My girl, where's she? Yellow submarine, there she is. Yeah. I have 3 daughters, and by the way, when Ushahidi started, I already had 3 daughters when that started, right? So people are like, I've got family now, things are hard, I can't do the startup. Guys, you can. It takes some discipline, and it takes some, a little bit, it's harder. I'm not saying it's easy, it's harder, actually, right? When you're running solo, sometimes it can be a lot easier. But there's benefits to family too, which is like, I have, a very solid, home base, right? And I can go back to that and get away from the tech world a little bit too. So there's value in it. But yeah, how do you balance that? I think balance for everybody is different. I mean, the things that are the worst for us is when I've got to travel a lot. I'll be traveling again this weekend, right? And that's complicated because, I'm away, there's things happening at home that you got to reintegrate. That can be challenging, right? But, there's also things that you just got to suck up and do as a family and as an individual. Like, so I've got to suck up and do some of the stuff I don't want. The family has to suck it up too sometimes. Say, well, that's what Dad has to do. It's what I have to do to make ends meet. And if we want to eat, then that's what happens. Like, if your dad's out there digging a ditch all day, he's also not with you, right? Or if he's got to go away and work remotely for 3 months and then come back, he's also not with you. There's people who are in all strata of society who have the same issue, right? And you try and figure out a balance for that. So for me, like, I really don't like taking meetings or doing things on the weekend. Right? That's one thing. People will be coming in from out of town. Oh, would like to have a chance to meet you and everything. I'm like, Monday, Friday, sure, but not Saturday and Sunday. Kind of getting away and doing things, on the weekends at the beginning, whether it's walking the Ngong Hills or, just doing things as a family is important. But I don't think I have a good balance of it. I don't think there's many. To be frank, I don't think there's many entrepreneurs that do, which is no vindication for me, right? But yeah, you also don't make it unless you do some of these things. So you gotta figure out how you're gonna make ends meet too. It's not a good answer to your question, but just to show you that I actually don't know either.
Just a little more about the people around you, because you're a very people-oriented person, and people do matter a lot to you, relationships, and just looking at the teams you've actually built from Ushahidi to the iHub and BRCK, they're relatively young, and you actually like product, you like hands-on, like actually working with the hands. What would you tell the young entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs or current entrepreneurs in this room? They need to get their hands dirty? Is that vital?
Are you referring to my KYM blog post?
Yes.
Yeah, I had a guy recently at the iHub, say basically, oh, I didn't realize this was a KYM job. What world do you come from? And it's actually mostly like college grads that are this way. Drive me nuts. This is why I don't look at resumes. You don't send me a CV if you want to be hired by me. Shoot me your portfolio. Show me what you've done, right? I freaking can't stand it when guys don't work, right? Like, just get your hands dirty and do stuff, right? I have no problem moving tables in the iHub to get ready for an event. Why do you, right? I have no problem trying to figure out something I don't understand with, some online shop, which, like for the BRCK, our shop, I had to figure out Magento with, luckily I have David, who is a genius, helping me. But I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I got to figure it out, because if I don't do it, who else is going to do it? Right? And so this mentality of like, oh, I've got a university degree, so I shouldn't have to work as hard, is something that really angers me. And so when I sense that in somebody that I work with, the exit is right there, right? It just drives me nuts. So, I think that some of the best entrepreneurs I know, and this was in my blog post, like Pete, who runs Pete's Coffee, and he helped set up Mocha City as well, which is out of Tanzania. He's a great entrepreneur. He started off with a little coffee bar on the iHub and grew that and grew into a cafe. And he's getting his hands dirty. He's making the coffee. He's taking the money from people. He's wiping the tables down, right? Pretty important things, but this is the owner of the business. Or Becky Wanjiku, who started off she started off in Katundu, as in a small village, right? And worked her way into becoming a tech journalist. And then from being a tech journalist, she started a company that she does networking. And she goes and visits people. If you're in a car ride with Becky, I remember I had some investors in town, and we went on a car ride out to Kiambu to show some of the stuff that she was working on. And I swear, 2/3 of that trip, she wasn't talking to anybody in the car. She was fielding phone calls and doing business deals. And I was like, that's work, right? That is work. And there's so many entrepreneurs who are afraid to get their feet dirty. The other guys, so besides the employees who are like, they're entitled anti-KYM kind of guys, right? And by the way, K-O-I-M for people who don't know, Kaziom Kono, don't like to work with their hands, okay? I had a business call. I was, actually I rode my motorcycle. I didn't get my feet as dirty. I rode my motorcycle to deliver 3 brick units to a customer who was going to buy 50. And then I sat there with him and tried to set them up with him. Completely failed because I had crap units. So I had to take them all back and I had to give him new ones in the future. Luckily, he's somebody who understands that, hardware, you have difficulties like that. And it was like, this is the kind of stuff you've got to do. And it's like, if you're not willing to do that as a CEO, then how can you ask it of anybody else? And how do you actually know your business if you're not willing to do it? So those are the 2 types of people in business, in startups, that drive me nuts.
Excellent. A few parting comments, Erick. You normally give me this advice, and you've given me advice over the last few years. And I wanted to actually tell the crowd here about traction and time.
So whenever I'm starting something or doing anything, the most important thing is, Jessica will tell you, I'll say traction, get traction. It's more important than anything else. Like, do something, get it started, right? Show that it can move somewhere, that it can get some traction. And if you do that, then everybody else will jump on board. So at the iHub, it was a matter of just like, can we show that we can build this space? And you'll remember there was 6 months of the floor being 2/3 done because our general contractor ditched us, and all kinds of crazy stuff. But because we had showed we could start, paint was starting to get on the wall, things were happening. All of a sudden, guess who came back to the table? Google, Nokia, Samsung. All the guys started coming back who had said no early because they couldn't see it. The traction was hugely important. The same thing goes on with just ordinary little things. If you want to put, if you want to sell something, a business, like ours with the brick, you've got to actually get it shipped. Like one of your greatest advantages is just shipping fast and being ahead. Speed, time is really important, right? And it killed me. 6 months it took that we were delayed shipping bricks was worse for me than it was for any of our customers. I was, so anxious and so annoyed with ourselves as a company. Even understanding all the problems that we had and understanding logically and intellectually why we were at this state. It was all very valid reasons, right? It's annoying because you've got to get traction, and every week, every day that goes by that you're not getting traction on your thing is completely lost opportunity. And so the other thing is time. Like when you're late for a meeting with me, or I'm late for a meeting with you, that's something that actually is it's an insult, right? Because your time is more important than my time, or my time is more important than your time. So I really try and make it on time for things. And I expect that of others. So when you show up late for a meeting, I'm like, so you're more important than the other 5 people in the room, right? And Dustin, yeah, we know there's traffic in Nairobi, the community, whatever, right? Figure it out, right? That's not my problem. The same way it's not your problem for me to be on there on time, right? Like, so time is important to me. Am I German? No. Though I look it. But, so I'm not like, rigid and military. What's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, militaristic about it. But it is important, right? Because it says a lot about your character and about who you think is more important than everybody else. And parting shot on stuff, I don't know how much time we have, is that a lot of people think that they're, and it comes out in many ways, think that they're better than everybody else, right? You've got to be willing to meet with people. Like, when you're a blogger and you want to write about something, I'll give you just as much time as I give the Wall Street Journal guy. I don't care, right? Because it's, who knows what's going to happen in the future, and your time is valuable, and I can't do that for everybody all the time, but it's like, like that, trying to make sure that that everybody understands that there's nothing special about me, right? I just happen to have worked hard enough to get to this level, but I put my pants on the same way as you do every day, right? We're very similar, and we're humans, right? We need to treat each other as such, and not have this kind of Bwana Mkubwa mentality about what we do. There's no reason for me to have a separate office with my big desk. Why don't I sit out here with everybody else? And that way I'll know what's going on better, we'll work together better, we'll make it further faster. You know, and that kind of a thing about understanding that there's a lot of parity in who we are as people, and treating each other with that trust and humility that requires, is something that I think a lot of people miss, you know? And I try and make sure that's part of how I build my businesses too, that there's a lot of equality amongst the team.
Thank you very much, Eric. And something resonating that I've heard for the last 59 minutes from Eric's talk is it's about people. It's about building people relationships, and the very important ingredient, trust. As entrepreneurs, do we know how to deal with people? Do we know how to build relationships? Do we know how to foster trust with each other? Right here in this room, are we able to trust each other and work together as a tech community and forge a better future for this country? That's a question I leave for you to ponder as you go home. But before we actually conclude, I'd actually like Betty to come up and probably take 1 or 2 questions from the audience.
Any questions?
Hi, my name is Charles. Yeah, I run a startup called Planet. So I'd like you to maybe to tell us, why do you think many Kenyan startups fail? Just give us a few reasons.
I think startups everywhere fail. Many startups everywhere fail. I don't think that there's anything different here than there is anywhere else in the world, right? Like, I remember there was a Nation Media guy that came up to me 2 years ago and said, we've had 50 new startups this year, and almost all of them fail. I'm like, yeah, so we need more startups, right? So, we expect 10% to make it on average, right? Anywhere in the world. And I expect the same thing here. So yeah, absolutely, 10% is a great success rate.
Thank you. My name is Brian. I'm working for a startup called Nobilis. So you say that most startups come from problems. Is there a way that a startup can come from not a problem per se? Isn't just an idea that's not related to a problem?
Trying to think of, did you have an example? A couple examples? Are we talking like the car, right? I think new inventions. So like there's a great kind of thing with Elon Musk is a physicist, and so he thinks differently than a lot of other people. Most of us are analog thinkers, so we're always comparing what we do to other. It's analogous to something, right? But that's how we come up with the idea. And so I think there's very few people who have actually original ideas. Most of us are. Innovation is by iteration, right? And that's what most of us are, myself included. We are innovating by iterating on something else with a different problem set, things like that. So are there new ideas with completely new fields and everything? Yeah, absolutely. Maybe the car is one. Maybe space elevators is another one. Which one?
Still solving a problem.
Yeah, you're solving I guess you are solving a problem, but you're not. I think what he's getting at is you're solving a problem that most people don't know, that don't recognize that exists. Right? That's at least how I'm defining it. So I hope I'm right, Brian, defining it that way. But no, I think, to, what's your name? Brad. To Brad's point, I think you do, like the best success stories come from when you solve a problem, right? Like how else are you going to get millions of people to do or buy or use your service unless you're solving a problem for it?
Eric, you mentioned that you had a mentor early on in your days in the States. I want to know how important you think mentors are to young startups and whether that is being addressed in Kenya.
Yeah, I think we do it very poorly in Kenya. I think startups are valuable. I don't actually know how you build a mentor network well, because every time we've tried it, we failed. So I think so. This is what I think, and I have no. This is Eric's theory. Has no has no grounding in reality besides my life, okay? Which is that the best mentors are almost organic in how they come about, based on shared kind of incentives or shared kind of ideas of the future or whatever you're doing, right? So for me, it's because we worked at the same company, and he needed somebody who could help him do a lot of these other things, and I needed somebody who could help me figure out how to do them better, and so it worked, right? I think investors can make really good mentors because they, their incentives are aligned with generally are aligned with the entrepreneur, and that they want it to succeed too, because if it does, they make more money. Again, I don't know what the magic, formula is to make a mentorship network work well in Kenya. The way I've decided to deal with it for our network in Kenya is we push people to investors. If they get money, we expect a certain amount of mentorship to happen because of that, and that's about it. I don't have a better answer.
Yeah, hi, Peter. Thanks for the talk. I just wanted to ask something that I don't know if you mentioned or tried, which is star quality. Do you think that it's important for startups? I mean, this whole thing about being out there and exposure. It's like, I don't know, we were waiting for you here in this room, and there was pretty electricity, it was electric environment to wait for you. So is the star quality important for you and also for young startups?
I mean, no, because nobody starts as a star, or very few do, unless they're born into it, right? So no, I don't think it's necessary at all. It helps later on if you're doing more, but no, I mean, absolutely not. I mean, none of us were stars when we started Ushahidi, right? We were kind of moderately well-known bloggers for Africa to credible, or but no, I don't think so at all.
Hi, my name is Alan, and my question is, have you ever met like a startup, instead of solving a problem, it created a need that led to something else, and how did they deal with this in Kenya?
Be on the spot, trying to think of names real quick. Trying to think of somebody who created a need. I mean, I think globally, again, when it gets back to that question that Brian asked earlier, right, which is, like, what if there's a need that you don't know you have? Like, the famous quote by Ford about cars, right? If people knew what they wanted, they wouldn't have built, well, screwing up this whole quote. How's it go? Yeah, they would have built a faster horse, right? They wouldn't have built a car. And man, I can't believe I screwed that quote so bad. Or like this is kind of like the Steve Jobs model of things too, which is like, we believe we understand our customer better than they understand themselves, so we're going to build this thing that we know they're going to buy, the iPhone or the iPad or something like that, right? That it's kind of creating a need that in a new niche that built out because of that. So in Kenya, though, I'm trying to think if there's any good examples of that in Kenya. I think there's early pioneers in things like e-commerce that people don't. I mean, so we're so analog in Kenya on commerce still, right? Like e-commerce is one of those things that, like, whether you're OLX or PGME or Jumia or whoever you are, you're kind of early days. And there's been ones before them that have crashed and burned over the last 6-7 years. Mama Mike's is one that's been going the longest, right? And the guy's been going for 9-10 years. Like, it's ridiculous, right? There's some guys who've been really pioneering it, and still, guess what? There's not enough demand yet, but it's a need that's out there that they're working towards, trying to create that need and demand. Yeah, I don't have great examples from here, but there definitely are those cases, but I don't know if we have a good one in Kenya yet.
Hi, my name is Shiro. I think we're all afraid of asking the one important question, because when I look around in the room, most of us are entrepreneurs here in Kenya, and the easy way to access funds is ask from investors in Kenya, which I feel we don't have. You only mentioned people like Google, Nokia. We haven't what ways do we start convincing my dad to give me $1,000 to just do an investment?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, like, one of the biggest problems that we've had here over many years is the lack of local Kenyan investors into tech, specifically tech, right? We have a lot of money in this country, and it goes into things like buildings and land and agriculture, things that people can see and touch and feel. And, you know, I remember talking when we were raising the Savannah Fund, we were trying to get, you know, as many investors locally as we could. We were lowering the bar, saying, listen, we don't care if you put in the normal 250 or 500,000 that we expect of most of our LPs. Go ahead and put in 50 or 100,000, right? We were open to that idea. And guys were like, well, I remember talking to this one investor, and he was like, well, you know, when we put money into things, guys want to go and be able to see that. So will I be able to walk into the office of these companies that we're investing and, you know, tell them to do things? Well, not really, right? Like, that's our job, right? You're giving us the money, we'll invest it for you. Things like that. But they want to see their plot of land. That's what they want to see. They want to see the building rising and saying, that's my money, right? So recognizing this back, like, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, one of the earliest things that we had to do for this ecosystem was figure out where to get seed funds. And the only way I could think about it was saying, okay, let's get as many of the local guys as we can to start investing. And some of the guys who've had early tech success in this country do angel invest. So that does happen, okay? And then there's the normal family and friends stuff that also happens, right? But how do you get to something that's more reliable, right? And so it's about 2.5 years ago that, you know, the 88 MPH started, and the Savannah Fund started, and we started seeing for the first time this ability to get smaller amounts of capital locally. And I'll tell you what my mentality around that was. Is I thought, and I don't know if this is true or not yet, we'll see, that if we show that outside investors are investing in Kenyan companies, and these Kenyan companies do well, and the local investors see that they missed an opportunity, that they'll start becoming more involved. I don't know, that's another of Eric's theories, has no standing in reality yet, okay? So what I did was, so we started that, but so what do we need? Actually, here's actually a great question. You want to see people in this country getting more money? Work like hell to have one single exit. One company that makes over $20 million minimum as an exit, okay? If we do that, investors from everywhere flock in, things happen, right? Startup thing booms. What we have right now, we're on the front edge of the curve, and it only goes up if we start seeing some successes. And you know, somebody raising money is not a success. That's just a good story that keeps you on this ramp, right? If we really want to see big money becoming available, unlocking our own investors in Nairobi, just in Nairobi alone, we need to show them that there's some big money here to be made.
Hi, I'm Victor. I'd like to know what the difference between our current entrepreneurs and the next generation of entrepreneurs.
I'd like to as well. I'm not a seer, right? I think what we have. Let me put it this way, Victor. I mean, I'm not trying to be flippant about it. It's that we actually don't know what that next generation will look like, but we can tell what they'll look like a little bit by what's gone before. So if you look at the Jomo Sherus, the Karanja Macharyas, the guys like that who started 10 years ago in our field, and now we see who we have now, we know we can maybe kind of cast a shadow into the future to understand it better. And so in 5 or 10 years from now, I'm expecting that based on what we're seeing today, that we're going to see, you know, a more vibrant kind of e-commerce ecosystem, and that means that startups will be able to bloom around that. And some of them might be selling more products and not just creating the platforms anymore. And I think that we'll also see a lot of the current entrepreneurs focus too much on Kenya and not enough on region or globe. And I think that the lessons of our generation of entrepreneurs is teaching guys about what they need to do to not make the same mistakes, right? And so the generation before sold ringtones. That was how they made their money, or did SMS campaigns. The generation today is trying to build platforms for consumers, which 1 in 1,000 will actually make, okay? What I'm hoping is people are paying attention and saying, actually, if I go B2B, there's actually probably much more chance of a market. And leave that consumer, roulette wheel alone. So I don't know what they look like, but I'm guessing they'll look a little bit more global, and they'll look more past consumers and into B2B as well.
Hi, I'm Martin. I work at a startup called Nobilis along with Brian. It bothers me. I represent the younger crowd over here. I'm joining university soon. But you mentioned, and a lot of successful entrepreneurs all over dropped out of university. And it really bothers me, and I'd like to know, first of all, what for example, in your case, what pushed you to drop out of school? What would push an entrepreneur to drop out of school, and how can this problem be solved?
Well, I've said before that I think, a university degree is good. An MBA makes you a really good employee. It's not for entrepreneurs, right? I was really not interested in what I was learning in school. I just didn't care at the time. I wanted to do things that I wanted to do. And it took me a while to realize that what I wanted to do was business. And so when I went back to school, I actually finished my school, right? And what I did was I went back to school because now I wanted to know business. So unlike every other student in those classes, I actually paid attention. I cared what I was learning. I kept the books because I wanted to read them again later, right? And I think that so much of education is not about learning. It's about, checking a box. If you show me a CV and you say you've got a degree in something, I don't care except for one thing. It proved to me that you could stick to something for 4 years. Good. I know you can commit, right? That's the only value it shows to me. I don't expect you to have learned anything of real value. You're going to learn on the job better than anything else. And that's why I expected you to have a couple of years out of university, that your portfolio is more important than anything else. We have interns who come in straight out of university into our organizations, and we test them. They've got 3 months as their internship, and then if they carry on, they've got 6 months to prove themselves. And only then will we give them another 3-month window as a full-time employee contract before we make it official. So they've actually worked a year straight out of university before we really trust them to actually be any good. So, I don't know, like if you're an entrepreneur, does school matter? I think you can learn some stuff from undergrad, but it doesn't have, it's not everything it's cracked up to be, and the reasons why people do it is usually wrong.
Go there and meet the people that you'll raise funds from later.
Yeah, so if you go to the right university, it becomes a great network. Like that, why would you ever want to go to an Ivy League school and pay $80,000 a year? Because the network, right? That's why you go to Harvard. You don't go to Harvard for your degree, right?
I have a second question. So what I'm really wondering is how you got into creating Umati and BRCK and such startups. Because my idea is that first, for me, also I'm going to university, so I'll be sitting in class most of the time, but then what I done is what I want to start up in. So how can you sort of go into different fields?
Yeah, so I think this is actually one of the biggest fallacies for startups, right? Like you have the most time to try new stuff when you're a university age student, or not even a student, but just university age, but you don't have any experience. Like no life experience or business or job experience, right? And so what happens is what you build, especially in our tech world, is you build solutions that work for the problems that you have as a university student or a 20-year-old somewhere, and nobody cares. So you're all proud of the parking app that you just built, because it's really hard to find parking at every university in the world. But that's not a big problem, actually, to solve. And so, or it's limited in scope. It's important to some cities, some places in the world. Or you build that, I built this SMS, database app. It's loaded up 5,000 other students in the last 10 years, right? So who cares? You don't have the experience yet. So again, my best, and you got to be careful about the startup thing too, because there's some guys who are brilliant entrepreneurs at 19, but guess what? They're usually not building software platforms for millions of people. That's very rare, right? Usually what they're building is a new company, they're building a new car mechanic business, right? That's entrepreneurship too, right? But it's not the type that you and me deal with. For our world, get out there, get some experience, get some world experience, right? Work for some big companies. There's a reason why Liko Agosta from Pesapal is good at what he does. He worked for 12 years in the banks, right? So he has real understanding of how money flows, and so he can build Pesapal. And not enough people have that experience and to try for it. And it doesn't always have to be a big company that you get that experience in either. It can be different fields. Travel, for God's sake, travel. Understand that Kenya is at the end of the day a small space, and Nairobi is even smaller. The problems that we're solving here might not be big enough.
My name is Taigu. Back to the question of investors. And I don't know if you've had this experience here in Kenya especially, where an investor wants to come on board, and they want to come on board with package, meaning they're asking, what is in it for me? What is in it for me? So you find that there's so many investors who are willing to come on board, but everyone has their own rules of, they come and say, no, I want this room to look like this. So I have had issues trying to raise money because everyone wants to come in and own it and say, this is what I want, this is how I want it to look like. So how do you deal with that? Because at the end of the day, you have to pay rent, you have to eat, you have to, So how do you solve that?
There's different levels of tension, right? There's a tension when you're like, no money, can't pay anything, and we gotta eat, and we've got to figure things out. And there's a certain amount of constraint that comes with that position, right? And you just have to make deals, and sometimes they're not good ones. That's why people take out loans from banks, right? At 20-something crazy %. And they're like, well, at least it keeps the business alive, and I'll pay it back over time. You, as an entrepreneur, you need to set the. You need to be the one who controls the environment where investment comes in. You set the rules for it, and sure, you're going to get people pushing back, but what you're trying to find is somebody who gets on the same sheet with you, and then you tell everybody, no, I've already got this guy on the sheet, we can't change that, he's the lead investor, he's the initial investor, so get on board with this, right? And you use that other guy as to help kind of leverage you to make those other guys join in the same level. But there's also this other problem, and this is the problem with local investors in Kenya too. Like, the reason why I went outside of Kenya for a lot of our investment is because here, guys want to give you, $20,000 and take 30% of your company. Like, come on, that's not realistic. You don't release it. It's not even smart for the investor, because you leave no incentive for the entrepreneur, right? You've got to leave them some incentive. And I think it's mostly a product of under-experienced investors in this country, and greed, which is always here. So the best I can say is this: there are actually a lot of investors who come through, whether it's here at the Startup Garage, or it's at the iHub, or it's at NILAB. We have investors coming through every week, right? You've got to talk to the managers of these spaces and say, hey, when somebody's looking to invest in this kind of thing, can you please give them my phone number, my email address? Put me in your Rolodex so that, because guess what? They come to me and they say, hey, Eric, we usually invest between 50 and 250,000, or between 500,000 and $1 million, and we're looking for companies who do, FinCap, or they're looking for agriculture, or looking for, e-commerce, and we say, I'd say, okay, and then I just kind of reel off in my head, who are the last 5 guys I can think of, boom, 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 and I connect them, right? And so if you're not in, Jessica's Rolodex in her head, then you're doing yourself a disservice. This is the value of the tech hubs, right? We provide a bigger target for media and money. That's what we do, right? We also provide you a space to meet each other and find your other future employees or your future business partners. But like, you got to use that, because 5 years ago it was worse, much worse than it is today. Now where we sit, it's doable, where it was really almost impossible before.
Okay, so last question.
Hey Eric, it's Elijah from Google. So from your last startup, the hardware one, what are the top 3 things that you know now that you wish you knew when you started your career? Top 3.
Okay. Well, like, so, you know, you always hear that hardware is hard, and it becomes kind of like a, people know. You know, it's actually really hard, right? And it is actually better to go in not really believing that and being naive than going in knowing, because if you knew, you wouldn't do it, right?
What makes it so hard?
It's hard. Hardware is hard because it's if I screw up on something on a website, I can fix it with code. If I screw up on something with a component, I have to rebuild the whole thing, right? And I might be out $50,000 on that one build. That's how bad it is, okay? And timelines, you're relying on, like at BRCK, we're relying on like 50+ component manufacturers to put together one brick. You better have your ducks in a row. You know, the biggest hire, the most important hire for us early on was somebody to handle, you know, the procurement process, right? We've got this brilliant lady now on our team. If I find anybody who steals her, I will hunt you down, right? She's amazing, right? And we couldn't do it without her. So that's why hardware is hard. That's how, you know, that's one lesson I've learned. The other lesson is maybe one that was just reinforced, which is, you know, BRCK is also co-founders, just like Ushahidi was co-founders. And when you do co-founding things, it takes years to understand your partners in a business relationship, right? And you have to have a lot of patience and belief and trust in the other person making the right decisions for the right reasons to have that gel together. You gotta have a lot of lunches together, you gotta have a lot of conversations. It takes literally years for those things to really become gelled and solid, right? Like Juliana and I are like sister and brother now. There's been times that we've also knocked heads like sisters and brothers, right? Along the way. But it takes, so, no, the other lesson was like just reinforcing. I was thinking about this a couple months ago. I was like, have patience, you know, with each other, because it takes time for us to gel. It's another third lesson. Oh, I guess the third lesson is about the money raising that I talked about earlier. It's hard to raise money. Doesn't matter who you know and how big you know your network is. It's still going to be hard. And so don't just think that, you know, just because you know a few people, you're going to make it happen. You got to talk to 50 people to get one of them to agree to fund you. So it's a numbers game. You got to keep going. The grind is hard. So startup grind is, you know, aptly named. It is a grind, and but it's a grind that's worth it for some of us. And it's not worth it for everybody, and you shouldn't. No, not everybody should do it. But for some of us, it's worth it, and you know, that's why we you know, fight in the trenches every day.
So Daudi insists on the last question.
Hi, my name is Daudi. I follow you on Twitter. I heard through the grapevine that you played rugby in your school days. Are there any lessons you learned on the rugby pitch that are relevant in the startup world?
So, okay, yeah, so I grew up playing rugby. And, you know, here in the Prescott League in Nairobi and surrounds, it's pretty competitive. And, you know, there's all these big Luo guys who could jump higher than me, right? And so, like, I remember this guy, like, his name was Olois Odiambo. Back in the day, I grew up with him. Since 10th grade, we played basketball against each other and rugby. And the guy looked like Michael Jordan, the same size, the same height, same build, in he was 16, right? He was just huge. And I realized that that you have to, first of all, I have to believe, you know, you have to imagine, that you can beat these guys. And what you do is you then get better tactically with him as well, right? So I knew how to time my jump better than him. He could hang in the air all day, right? But I had to time it, right? And so we had to learn how to do that, and we, was able to disrupt and things like that. So I mean, I think the lesson is that that it doesn't matter if you look outmatched, you can still win. And we did.
So that was an amazing session. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your patience. I took so many questions because I believe there's so much to learn from each other, and everyone needs a chance to be heard. And it's not every day you have Eric in the room. So I'd like to thank our sponsors, Google for Entrepreneurs, BuyMo Card. BuyMo is actually one of those startups that is going to exit for 20 million USD. So watch out for them. And we'd like to thank the Startup Garage for giving us the space. Also, we'd like to thank our media partners, Business Mind. They actually brought us 25 magazine giveaways. And we are a community. Community is about participation. So, of course, Eric and Jessica get 2 copies. And anyone who asked a question, who tweeted, you have a copy of Business Mind. So, Eric, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for spending time. I hope you stay a bit and interact with the guys. And we have a token of appreciation for you.